Hi everyone, welcome to today's exciting live session about how behaviour change can help save the planet with WongDoody and Scone. My name is Georgina Wilson-Powell. I'm the founder of Pebble magazine. I'm a sustainable communications expert and author of several books on sustainable living. And I'll be moderating today's panel, which is all about how design experiences need to support behaviour change and help companies meet their sustainability goals. Sustainability sits at the top of the agenda for many corporations who are trying to put together the right policies and processes, but they face complex economic realities and the world needs urgent action and not just lofty goals. When it comes to moving beyond planning and into activating sustainable strategies, we aren't always on point. The X factor of humans and how we behave is rarely mentioned, but incredibly important. Putting strategies in place that enables behaviour change in individuals and businesses is a fundamental component in creating lasting cultural shifts. But how do you successfully enable that behaviour change? Today, our expert panellists will help you dig into the stumbling blocks between the sustainable goals and changing behaviours. Can I welcome Annie Stewart, Senior Strategist, Sustainability and Innovation at WongDoody. After an extensive career in user experience design, Annie shifted her sights to making positive impact for a wider audience by innovation and sustainability strategy. She's designed corporate strategy, innovation funnels and new products and services for major brands in logistics, retail and finance. Annie leads innovation and sustainability practices for WongDoody, bringing together diverse capabilities in transformation, service design and digital strategy. Can I also introduce Jan-Willem Romberts, founder and CEO of Scone. Jan-Willem is passionate about creating a more sustainable world for everyone. He is an award-winning climate technology entrepreneur and inventor with a successful track record of globally scaling climate tech platforms. He founded his first successful clean tech company 10 years ago and is as passionate about creating climate breakthroughs now as he was then. He is now the founder and CEO of Scone, a platform that helps cities, companies, and individuals to accelerate towards their climate targets by positively influencing their behaviour change. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Time is short, so we'll leap straight into a big question, which will give people watching a good idea of what you are about and what your mission is. So Annie, would you like to tell us what your overall mission is and how sustainability fits into that mission?
Sure. At WongDoody, we work with lots of different brands to design experiences that motivates, influence, and inspire humans. That's our mission. And this is whether they're customers, employees, or other companies that they work with. And based on our research, what we found is that people want to do more to be more sustainable in their lives and at work. So it's quite natural that WongDoody get into this space and create a specific offering towards that. So what we've done is we've leveraged our experience and knowledge in design thinking and UX design to create a new toolkit that is specifically focused on motivating and nudging people towards making more sustainable decisions in their lives, and then building those into the habits over time. So that's our offering there.
It's a pretty big offering. It's fantastic to hear. Thank you. And Jan, do you want to tell us your side of you're the other side? What's your mission?
Sure. Yeah. Scone's mission is to facilitate really the transition to a sustainable society and to bring a quality of life with that for all across the social divide. And so what we want to do is to make climate change something that connects people rather than to divide people. And we want to unveil all that is positive around the climate transition. Our thesis is that many individuals want to live more sustainably, but they don't perhaps know where to start or what makes most sense for their context. And so the Scone approach there is to make the climate change fight, if you want, positive. Yes, we can, together, inspiring, vision-driven, and rather than sort of a finger pointing, we want to create a place where individuals, cities, and governments can connect, be inspired by one another, and collaborate together towards climate goals. And in that, we want to highlight, the opportunities that clean technologies, sustainable products can bring, not just for the climate, but also for people's comfort, their health, their wallet, and then also for the environment. It doesn't need to be a burden. it's an opportunity, and that's really what we believe in.
Again, no small mission, but it's so fantastic to have people like yourselves who are so passionate about this, working on all these, all the different behaviour changes that are needed, big and small, so up and down the scale. How have you found working with each other? How has it influenced your own approach to sustainability and your company's approach to sustainability? Jan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, Annie and WongDoody's design toolkit really influenced the way that we think about interaction design. I think their research and design methods changed the way in which we create continuous engagement with our users to really get people on track to habit formation. And so Annie was already mentioning a few of these things, but nudging people, that is starting by small, doable steps, building up a bit of self-confidence, if you want, social identity around sustainability, and then starting to track your progress towards goals is something where the design approach of WongDoody has really helped us. And I would say it's been instrumental to make us think through how to deliver a product with impact, think through personas, through strategies to create the user engagement needed to make impact.
Oh, that's really great. I mean, I've been really inspired by Scone's data-driven approach and their investments in the thinking and the content behind it, which is so important. And just their continued desire to really capture the real numbers on what people are really doing in their real lives. Because we know through a lot of research so far, people want to be more sustainable, great, but what are they actually doing? Where are they struggling? What's blocking them? These are questions that we're starting to be able to answer through a platform like Scone, where they're, really investing in experimenting and tracking those behaviors. They're beyond just tracking it. They're really kind of a playground, really, to try different types of nudges to see what works and what doesn't work, and so on. In our first collaboration together, we focused on mobility and trying to get people to drive less. And just through some simple changes, to be honest, nothing huge, we managed to kind of get people towards action a little bit faster. And in the 2 months that we were tracking behavior on the app, the people who were engaging in the new designs lowered their mobility footprint by 37%, which I think is quite profound, because
that's massive.
It's massive. When you think about behavior change, it's so difficult. There's so many roadblocks, and people have a tendency to behave in different ways than what we expect. So being able to experiment and try new things is super important in this space. And that's what I really love about working with Scone is it gives us the opportunity to do that, which is important in our industry.
Well, that's it. And I think that so captures why the X factor, that human factor, is so important, isn't it? Because we know the big policies, we know the big goals, we know the big problems, but actually getting people moving forward quick enough is really the biggest stumbling block.
Yeah, and in the right direction too, because that's the danger sometimes when you're dealing with behavior changes. Like I said, people can act really unpredictably, or if we don't fully understand the motivations and influences that are around them, there's the possibility of making big mistakes. And just, an example off the top of my head, from the UK, there was a campaign by a bunch of different supermarket chains to introduce reusable bags, to try to get people to stop using the disposable plastic bags, which is a great idea. But on their first launch, the design that they launched into the market was a plastic bag, but it was meant to be used up to 10 times or something like that, which would reduce the overall plastic footprint. But the way that the bag was designed is it was so similar in its look and feel to the disposable ones that people treated it the same way. And even though it was a very well-meaning campaign, it actually increased plastic waste from the supermarket chains by 10-fold, by 10 times. So it's very easy to be be a well-wisher and to think that our designs are going to have a positive impact, but it's without real insights into behavior design, and without a way to sort of experiment and try things first, you can have some negative consequences.
Yeah, and to build on that, what we saw as well, and I think that's something that we really saw in the designs coming out in the end as well is the idea of perceived behavioral control is important. If you overwhelm people by footprint that they have, which they cannot resolve, then that just feels like a burden, that feels like perhaps something that's shaming. But showing them actually the small steps where they can make an impact and can lower things is really important. So as you then design an application, an interaction system, focusing on these things and then adding sort of a layer of social proof where people are inspired by what others do. You can say, oh, but this seems to have worked for my friend A, B, or C. That really starts to create this ecosystem where people inspire and encourage each other, and everybody's doing it at their pace within a boundary of comfort that makes sense.
That's it. None of us work in a vacuum or live in a vacuum, do we? So we can all influence good and bad over as we've seen over the years. But that actually really nicely brings me onto my next question, which was about, how we've talked a lot about individual action and trying to nudge individuals to make different behaviors more sustainable. But how fair do you think it is to put this pressure on individuals to radically change every part of their lives when a lot of companies are sort of recording record-breaking profits? Like, where should the split be, do you think, between for big behavioral changes to come?
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of people about their thoughts on this very question. And I have to say I've been surprised because I haven't spoken to one person who considers, fixing the climate crisis to be solely the responsibility of corporations or government for that matter. Everybody seems to recognize that even though we're contributing differently, everybody has a role to play. And I find that really promising because even though we know that there's the big culprits and people who are in corporations, especially, who are much more culpable for it, everybody seems to feel that they need to take their own responsibility and do their own part, even if it's small. And even the people who are like, I'm not a green person, I'm not a sustainable, I'm not a hippie person, they also just get the sense that sustainability feels like common sense. Don't waste things, don't pollute things. Those things are bad for us. It's that simple. That's the overall impression that I've been getting.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think there's a saving to that now as well, isn't there? Sorry, Jan.
Yeah. No, I think that was spot on. And I think, as I mentioned, that's part of Scone's vision as well. This should be something that's collaborative. And so it's quite easy to point fingers. And of course, companies need to be held accountable. Governments need to be held accountable. But we can't stop there, because then you sort of end up with this finger pointing paralysis and no action is taken. So instead of asking, why is my company not doing A, B, and C? You can say, where do I start? And how can I collaborate with my company? And as a company, you can think, how can I collaborate with my employees? And so to just add perhaps one thing to that, which is, moving towards a more sustainable life doesn't need to be a burden. So sometimes we present it like, oh, this enormous sacrifice that we need to make to live more sustainably. But the reality is, switching mobility to use more sustainable modes of transport, whether it's walking or cycling, it's healthier. You'll be in better fitness. It's safer. Setting up your home with cleaner technology, these days it saves you money. It's less maintenance. It's better air quality. If you change your food habits and you focus more on in-season vegetables, farm to fork type of meals, they're healthier and often cheaper when it's in season. So there are a lot of benefits to sustainable life that we should put in the spotlight as well, not to make it look like this enormous burden we're taking upon us as individuals.
I agree. Yeah. So just really quickly on that point, I feel like there's still kind of this embedded insinuation that living sustainably is expensive. And maybe that's in part because, sustainable products or green products were maybe more expensive to produce because they were outside of the normal manufacturing process, or companies capitalized on having a differentiator in the market. And so they felt that they could charge more for green products. But not actually. And, statistically, the richer you are, the bigger your carbon footprint is. It's wealthy people who are buying tons of stuff and flying all over the place and driving big cars and so forth. So it's actually, it's cheaper, and like Jan said, sometimes more healthier and more pleasurable to live a more sustainable, simpler life. It's not necessarily a burden or an expense.
That's it. I think focusing on the positive, because there are so many positives, is a really strong angle that we all need to spend more time working out how that happens.
Yeah.
Jan, you mentioned it as well, sort of, you mentioned something there about employees and like using employees and company culture to shift the dial in a quicker way. Do you think that can be a sort of secret weapon for bigger behavior change rather than tackling individuals one at a time? We use the sort of company structures.
Yeah, definitely. The reality today is that the biggest pressure for climate is on companies, not on individuals. And so starting behavior change from the corporate context is a smart strategy. Companies have been setting targets, climate targets. There's investor pressure. There are regulatory frameworks that are put into place. And so if then these companies start to think about, how can I lower my mobility footprint, my energy footprint? Of course, that helps the companies to meet their targets. But at the same time, these employees are individuals who then start to affect their families, their friends, their communities. And so you get this very positive contagion of sustainable behavior. And in the end, this distinction sort of between company and individuals is fairly artificial, right? A company is just a collection of people who work together, who make decisions. And so as this culture starts to build in a company, you will see an acceleration as well to more sustainable decisions that are started to be made by executives, by managers, as they grow more aware of what sustainability means in their context. And so that's where we see that a lot of companies are sort of in the early days of that process. They have set their targets towards investors and the board, but they're just at the start of this cultural transformation. But that's where, a lot of potential should be to create an acceleration in the climate transition.
Yeah,
Annie,
I agree.
Point, aren't you? You've been pushing for sustainability within WongDoody, and kind of you're an example of an individual or an employee in a business making huge waves.
Yeah, I mean, as a strategist, I chose my career path because I wanted to create change. I mean, part of everyone choosing their career path is deciding how you want to make an impact in your community or in society in general. So when we sign a company contract, we're already kind of signing up to create change. And it's not just strategists or people who want to work in healthcare or, for a nonprofit or an NGO. I mean, it's also lab technicians who want to discover a better way to grow food so that we can feed more people. It's helping people get their grocery shopping done quickly into their cars so they can be with their families. I feel like in all types of work, people are looking for ways to improve the lives of people around them or their society. And as a result, workplace culture has always been valued as a way to enable that kind of change that they want to create in the world, but also foster collaboration with people who could help them get there, encourage innovation and different ways of thinking on how to get there, and overall, create a sense of shared identity. So starting in the workplace is an ideal place to start with introducing new behaviors, helping people create change through their jobs and just in their lives in general. Totally makes sense.
I totally agree. And I should mention, if you've got questions for Annie or Jan or comments on anything that we're talking about, please drop them in the chat and we can pick them up at the end. We've got a few more questions and then we'll come on to any questions that anyone wants to share. We have a question that I was going to ask about sustainable behavior design strategies and how far, we've obviously talked about employees, we've talked about individuals, but how can we influence and nudge those behaviors within our own supply chains? Annie, do you want to sort of start there?
Yeah, that's a big one. In fact, I mean, we've identified supply chain transparency and cooperation as kind of one of the biggest challenges to shifting to more sustainable practices, and one of the most important transitions that companies need to make. And it even came, we have a ongoing partnership with The Economist, and the work that we're doing with them, that was identified as one of the biggest pieces that we could pick up as a way to help companies with their transition. So, and it's because it's incredibly important into not only understanding what's going on, but eventually reducing their energy and waste footprints. So yeah, that's a huge one. And I just have to say, behavior change design still works there. I mean, companies are made up of humans. They make decisions the same way that the rest of us do. And they're also influenced by a combination of intrinsic and extrinsic motivations and influences from what they see around them. So we really use the same toolkit when we're dealing with companies as we do with consumers or employees. And speaking strictly to design, yeah, it's the exact same toolbox when designing behavior change for people or for companies. I guess to dig into that a little bit more, we've defined kind of 4 behavioral profiles. So the ways that people change, and this applies to both humans and companies, I think. There's people who are motivated, but maybe need a lot of help to stay on track. So we have specific design tools that we can use for that. We call that a steer profile. There's also a spur profile, maybe people or companies who are less motivated, but once they get going, they're really good at just sticking with it and changing. There's a different kind of set of patterns and approaches that we take there. There's inspire, which is easy. They're generally motivated and also very good at change. So you just need to get some good examples in front of them. And then there's force profiles, who are not motivated and not very good at change. And I would say that the main difference between designing for consumers and for companies is that consumers will generally fall more or less into one of those categories in whatever extremity. But with companies, we find that we need a really healthy balance of all 4 of those: a bit of force, a bit of inspiration, a bit of spur, a bit of steer. And even if you have to use force tactics, through requirements on your RFPs and things like that, we can still help to make those experiences less painful, easier to get through if you're sort of forcing your supply partners to change, or vice versa.
So being the carrot and the stick has a role to play sometimes.
Yes, exactly.
And Jan, how about yourself? Have you found the apps being useful for people sort of wanting to change their sort of supply chains?
Well, in our context, supply chain is really, really interesting. From a carbon footprint perspective, there's been quite a bit of tailwind recently, in that companies now need to report not on their own footprint alone, but also on the footprint of their supply chain. And that's upstream and downstream. And so we're starting to see this sort of natural contagion effect that takes place through that. So if, as a company, I need to know the carbon footprint of the products that I procure, if it involves my employees, so some of the scope 3 footprints includes mobility, the commuting of the employees, then you start to get these network effects, right? Because then as a company, I will set up a certain policy, but if I want to positively engage with my employees, I can use Scone to, for instance, set certain rewards towards my employees for sustainable behavior. And then you get that effect that, on the one hand, emissions are reduced for the company as well. Then each one of these people are learning behavior changes that then will spread in their environments. So for us, that's sort of naturally embedded by the way that now regulations are being structured. And as a digital platform, that's exactly where we want to play, to allow these types of collaborations to have that acceleration.
And just sort of quickly, obviously we touched on it earlier. There's a lot to get done. There's a lot of changes that need to be made at every level: the supply chains, the consumers, the employers, every level of business. Do you think we, and when I say we, I mean mostly businesses, Are we moving quickly enough? Are we pivoting quickly enough to avoid the huge carbon-related emissions that we're seeing? Obviously, we're sort of seeing, more and more sort of urgent news reports saying that change needs to happen more quickly. Where do you think businesses are on that sort of pivot? Annie, do you want to start?
No. Sadly, this isn't everyone, obviously, but what I find in most cases that once you kind of peek behind the commitment statements and the targets, we see a real lack of governance that's backing it up. Even companies who do have a dedicated sustainability person, oftentimes, or team, doing the real work, what we find is that, they lack the budget and they lack the mandate to actually get things done. They sort of have to kind of beg for things to happen, which is a lot of the companies that we speak to come to us for help with that, because behavior change design can help with that. But what we've found is that the governance is still quite far behind, even in companies who say that they're committed to energy reduction. And just to back that up, WongDoody is part of Emphasis, and we just released the Emphasis ESG radar for 2023, and there's some really great statistics in that around what companies are doing and what they're not doing, and maybe we'll throw that in the chat at some point. But they found that only 30% of companies are placing responsibility for ESG goals in the C-suite. So it's just not enough top-down responsibility there. And only 19% of companies are tying executive compensation to ESG goals. So, if you're not financially motivating the leadership and the governance in your company to meet these goals, then you're not going to get there. And that's something that it's so important. It's something that we want to work on. We have limited capacity, to do that as consultants. Obviously, that's something that the companies just really have to commit to and decide to do on their own. But that is still a very big necessary first step that it's going to take before we can really feel that we're pivoting fast enough to meet these goals.
Yeah, and we see that the same thing, that setting up of governance is something that is only starting to happen now. To go back to the regulatory tailwinds, I think they're there. Things like Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in the EU is very powerful. It starts with the biggest companies, but then how to implement that is a whole different thing. And so it's very dependent also on what type of company that you are, right? If you're a heavy industry type company, it means perhaps decarbonizing one big process that you have running at your factory. If you're a consulting business, maybe it's the mobility of your employees that's the number one thing to work on. If you're a bank, it can involve the emissions of your customers, so the emissions of financed assets. Mm-hmm. And so whereas a company, then you need to start engaging with your customers, going back to sort of supply chain effects, to go on that journey of decarbonization together. And so what we see is essentially targets are set. The governance is at an early stage, governance around CSRD and some of these directives. But now it's all about execution. And that's where sometimes the reflection of bigger companies is that it needs to be perfect before you get started. And there's some hesitance in that. But where we say, hey, don't think yourself into action, act yourself into thinking. Start with something small that can develop in this small fire that can then expand across your organization and start this sort of cultural transformation around sustainability. But that's how real action will get started. Act yourself into thinking, and progress over perfection. It doesn't need to be perfect from the start, but that you start to make progress towards your target is what matters.
I love that, because I think there is this culture that's come through, which is, can't share anything or can't get anywhere until something is perfect. But like you said, we just need to start, and we just need to, move forward in whatever way that we can do, and that looks like. We've had quite a few.
Yeah. Oh, just one more point on that. I completely agree, and I find that's a lot of the questions that we get from clients is what do we do, where do we start, and how do we communicate about it without getting a backlash, basically, because the thing is, everything that we're doing around sustainability is new. This is an innovation space, and for innovation to be successful, you have to be able to try things and experiment with things. And one of the disturbing trends that I've seen recently, and I can't point any fingers or take a blame, but a lot of times when you see a corporation try something new and it doesn't quite fly right, or it doesn't happen the way that they think it's going to, there's a lot of quick backlash about greenwashing. And there's a lot of genuine greenwashing, and we don't want that. But we also still need to be able to foster the type of innovative culture where companies feel that they can experiment, feel that they can try new things. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to move forward. And we can give them the space to do that. Because without it, we get this effect, like I think it was called green hushing, where people stop sharing and they retreat into themselves, and that's counterproductive to everyone moving forward. The biggest question I get is like, show me examples of what other people are doing. And if we can't see examples of what other people are trying, then we can't learn, and we can't be inspired, and we can't move forward.
That's it. It's got to be collaborative, isn't it? We can't all be. We need all of us on the same mission and sharing, for sure. We've had quite a few questions in, so I'm just going to, hopefully we've got time for a couple. So if that's all right, we'll just move it on slightly. We had a question come through saying, how does the rising cost of living and inflation threaten sustainable behaviour changes that we need to be making urgently? How do you prioritise? And I think that's a really, really key question from Kelly, because obviously it affects everybody and every business.
Yeah,
I'm going to.
If I can take a stab at that one, and I would like to again sort of turn that around into an opportunity, because if I think about inflation today, I think about energy. Wow, have we ever felt fossil fuels in our spending as much as today? Probably not. And so, not as far as I remember, can you save so much money by sustainable behaviors in your home, by increasing the energy efficiency of your home, installing solar panels, especially in Europe now, perhaps where the crisis is hardest hit. Less car travel, more cycling. All of these things right now are very much in the money, so to speak. And so I think that provides an opportunity for actually accelerating the energy transition. And so there's no silver lining in any war and in any crisis of this sort. But for Europe and for other parts in the world that are suffering under these rising energy prices, I would hope that brings an acceleration.
Completely agree. I mean, I kind of hope it has a positive effect, that people will buy less, they'll use less energy, they'll fly less. And, obviously these are things that we enjoy, that we love to do. But I'm hoping that, the same way that we learned a lot of new skills and ways to live from the COVID lockdown, I'm hoping that we'll use this opportunity to find satisfactory alternatives. There's a lot of great things that we learned during lockdown, such as live streaming to increase audiences and collaborate across borders. That was a great outcome of a pretty painful constraint that was put on us. But in innovation, constraints usually produce, they create opportunity for innovation. In fact, a friend of mine told me recently that David Bowie, every time that he shot a video, he would have like this hat full of problems that each one of his band members had to pull out, and he gave them a constraint to force them to be more creative when they were coming up with ideas and filming the videos. And one of them turned out, it actually became one of their most famous guitar solos. It was from the song Hero. I'll leave you to YouTube that. The constraint that was given to them was the drummer had to play a guitar solo, and it became one of the most famous guitar riffs of their repertoire. So with inflation and recession, I think that we need to see these as opportunities for innovation and finding a better way to deal with these types of constraints. I hope it's a positive outcome.
That's it. And one of the constraints is not being able to waste as much, isn't it? So we are having to look at, from an individual way and from a corporate way, reducing that waste in whatever way we can. So that is a definite opportunity for a lot of people.
For sure.
We've had another question, so I'm going to keep it moving, keep it coming. So if companies catch on to how people are behaving and thinking differently, might we hopefully expect them to make reactionary changes to their operations? Thanks. That one's from Gerard. What do you guys think? Annie, do you want to sort of step in?
Absolutely. I mean, that's where WongDoody focuses, and it's why it's our passion. When we look at sustainability, what we see is companies are starting to set new policies, which is great. That enables action. And then they generally follow up with the process, which gives people steps to execute on that policy. But when you focus on people and humans and how they're thinking and behaving, you can have an exponential impact that you don't get through just policy and process or even product alone, because it changes their mindset. It gives them new tools that they can use in other areas of their life. And that's what they'll do. They'll look at their work and they'll try to apply those changes and those tools to their work. They'll talk to their peers around them and influence them. And they'll even take it home and use it in the decisions and the processes that they have at home with their families and friends. So absolutely, focusing on people is the absolute key to accelerating any kind of change in business or in your personal life.
Yeah, totally. And what I would add to that is, well, rather than just reactionary, I hope, and I start to see that companies can do this more proactively as they think about these threats and the risks and turn them into opportunities. To go to that example of a bank, purely from a risk perspective, a bank can look at their mortgage portfolio and think, oh, I have to report my emissions on that. Oh, I have to manage the energy efficiency risks that are coming with that. But on the other hand, if they think about the opportunity that they have to start offering new services around solar panels, around heat pumps, around all of these financed assets that need to go into their homes, then that's a proactive business opportunity. You can start to think, behaviors are changing, people are more aware, my customers are changing. I want to be ready with a new business that can capture this opportunity.
And so do you think, as well as the behavior change, then it's a mindset change as well? It's seeing opportunities rather than challenges.
I think it is. And I mean, if I have one critique sort of on our climate movement, that it's been quite a lot of sort of doomsday thinking and all of the bad things that happen through climate change, but not enough seeing the opportunity. And if we don't do that out of the climate movement, then how do we expect all of the companies and the individuals to do that? So it is a mindset change, I think, and that's very powerful if you can sort of, as a brand, communicate that to your customers, as you can communicate that as a company to your employees. That can be very powerful.
That's it. I think the level of innovation that's coming through in the last sort of 10 years has been absolutely incredible, moving us forward in leaps and bounds that we sometimes forget about and just see the bad. I think we've got time for one last question, maybe two. We'll see how it goes. We've had this one in, and I think it's a great question, actually, in terms of all the things that you guys have talked about and sort of bringing a lot of those themes together. So what advice would you give to individuals who want to create a more impactful sustainability culture at home or at work? And what behaviors have you seen being the most successful in getting efforts off the ground? Annie, do you want to sort of step in?
Sure. Well, when it comes to consumers or people, everyday people, I think something that often gets overlooked but has a huge impact is just the stuff that we buy. Obviously, buying less stuff is better, but buying quality stuff, things that last, things that can be repaired, repairing things when they're broken, all of the stuff that we fill our homes with, like electronics, toys, and gadgets, and all of those things, clothes, they have a huge carbon and waste footprints. So that's a really key thing that people can start thinking about right immediately. And I like that one because it actually has kind of a twofold effect. On one hand, it will reduce your overall carbon and personal carbon and waste footprint, but second, it also sends a message to the companies who need to change and start creating and marketing higher quality products that can be repaired, and or explore new business models where maybe they're not selling stuff anymore, they're subscribing or renting things or promoting peer-to-peer networks. I think that's a really huge one that consumers can embrace as part of their portfolio of things that they're doing to be more sustainable. I don't know, Jan, do you agree with that, or do you have?
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And of course, what I would advise to these people is use Scone and ask your employer to use Scone.
Yeah.
But no, so I think the products that you buy are really important. You mentioned before, Annie, as well, one of the things that we collaborated on was mobility. And just to start by understanding the footprint that comes from your mobility, you know, from the different modes of transportation that you use, and that to get some insight around how you can change that pattern. And we've worked on that, sort of these first small steps that you can take. For instance, the trips 1 mile around your home, 1 kilometer around your home. How many times are you still using the car for that? 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, 5 kilometers. And how can you start shifting your own behavior that you cycle in those to those places? And so that's another one where just tracking yourself is quite easy, and it can save you money. So those things are always, I think, a good place to start the behavior changes that not only reduce emissions, but also save you money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess as well, sort of working in the cultural element is actually normalizing it by talking to each other and doing things like this, where we all discuss what we're all doing. Go back to Annie's point, sharing, and not being afraid to put our hands up, even as individuals, when things don't work. We've tried and trying different ways. We have one last question, and it's more of a sort of investment question, which I think is quite interesting as well. From Bavo: considering everyone is afraid of a recession coming soon, is it smart to make investments into sustainable innovation right now, or is it better to wait? Oh, I'm really interested to see what you guys think, actually.
I love this question. There is actually a lot of research that's gone into this that shows that companies who invest in times of recession or in times of trouble, economic upheaval, fare better in the long term than companies who don't. A lot of companies have this tendency to sort of freeze. You know, during COVID, you saw some companies who froze operations and laid a lot of people off. You saw other companies, usually in the tech industry, that hired people and used that as a way to innovate. And in the long run, the companies who invest in times of economic turmoil come out stronger in the long run. So absolutely, it's the perfect time to invest in this. It's the best time.
It's almost getting back to the constraint question, isn't it? The financial constraint can actually produce incredible results.
Yeah, if you stop innovating or improving, then basically you're just paying to maintain systems that are already broken. It makes much more sense to continue investing and improving them.
Jan, do you agree?
Okay, completely agree. And just think about some of these areas that we've talked about in this session as well, like energy. Who does not want to get rid of their fossil fuel dependency strategically at this point? You know, you can talk about recession, but what better time has there been to invest in solar, whether you're a company and you know you want to install solar panels on the rooftop of your buildings, or whether you're an individual. And so on energy, there are so many opportunities right now to do positive business case investments that will help you strategically for the future, to eliminate some risks that are becoming bigger every year.
Definitely. Well, that's a resounding right now is good for investment from the panel.
Call me.
On that note, you can find Jan and Annie's details in the chat, I believe, and find them on LinkedIn. You can also find more information about Sustainable by Design on WongDoody's website. And again, I believe the link is in the chat. So find that and definitely check out much more of the information that these guys have been talking so wonderfully about. Thank you so much for your time today, guys. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you and see what you think and hear all of your expertise. So thank you for tuning in.
Thank you, Georgina. It was a pleasure.
Great.